So I had a few requests to do a video on self-inquiry and how to keep up the practice on a daily basis. And if you don't know, self-inquiry is the internal investigation for what you truly are. So for example, whenever a thought arises, rather than paying attention to the content of that thought, you flip your attention on the source of the thought itself and look for the one that's aware that there's a thought. And this is a practice that is done persistently throughout the whole day. And it eventually ends with the recognition that what you truly fundamentally are isn't actually a separate self at the center of experience, but rather the substratum of all that is, which isn't really a person. Ramana Maharshi called it the self with a capital S, even though he didn't speak English. That's just our English translation for it. And what he meant by the self wasn't necessarily a person with personified attributes. So it can be confusing if you think of it as such. What he actually meant by the self was the undivided, impersonal substratum of beingness itself, or you could call it pure awareness, not as something to objectify, but rather the prerequisite for objectification itself. So self-inquiry isn't necessarily a practice which is supposed to get an answer. When you ask the question, who am I? An answer is not supposed to arise. Or you could say the answer is the silence. And this question of how to keep up with self-inquiry throughout the whole day is tricky to answer. How-to questions in general are tricky because it's not that there's really the free will for someone to just decide to do it and they need to know how in order to make it happen. It's more so a matter of your conditioned interest in it. So an individual is either going to be deeply passionate about truth-seeking, about self-investigation, or they're not going to be. And so if you are deeply interested in it in a genuine way, you won't really need to look for a how-to response. It's just going to happen in and of itself. And if you're not interested enough in it, then I suppose you'll forget about it. And there's no amount of advice I could give to someone who's not interested in it that is really going to help. And I don't really talk about this a whole lot because it's not really relevant, but for the sake of this video, I suppose I could tie in a relevant example of it. My day job is that I'm a tattoo artist, and years ago, when I was doing self-inquiry very heavily, I would be working on a tattoo, and it really calls into question as well the notion of free will and watching in direct experience how actions are unfolding. Because I would be working on a tattoo and the question would arise, who is making this happen? Who's the one that's doing a tattoo right now? And there would be a very intense internal watchfulness of how the action of tattooing is actually unfolding. And it seems as though the conventional perception that humans have is their mind will create this narrative that there's a separate agent somehow at the center of experience who is making things happen. And so the mind would say, I'm doing a tattoo. Well, okay, but who is the I that's actually doing the tattoo? Because I is just a word, it's a concept. So who or where is this stable agent that this I is actually referring to? Where are they? What is their validation of existence? And self-inquiry is essentially the fervent looking for that center of experience. So I would do self-inquiry while tattooing, and it just became instantly obvious that there wasn't anyone doing a tattoo. tattooing was just appearing to happen, and there wasn't really anyone making it happen. So it's a complete polar opposite way of perceiving how actions unfold to the conventional notion that everyone is conditioned to think and perceive from. There isn't anyone who's actually doing self-inquiry itself as a practice, which is why it's difficult to give advice or how-to answers, because there isn't really anyone doing the practice that could stand to know how to do it more efficiently. So it's just that there's the natural conditioning for there to be an interest in it, or there isn't. And aside from that, there's really not much that I can give as far as advice on self-inquiry. So there's either a passionate interest in truth-seeking, or there isn't. And there's not really a judgment that comes into it either. If someone isn't that interested in self-inquiry and they're fine with just running along with that fiction, that there is someone separate at the center of experience making things happen, that narrative is fine. It doesn't need to go away. That just so happens to be misleading and the source of suffering, but it doesn't really need to leave, because what one truly is, they never stop being. So if that narrative is happening of I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm a separate person, that narrative is just a fiction, and it doesn't really stain your true essence of being as being that which is beyond all personhood. So it's fine if someone isn't interested enough in self-inquiry to really keep up with it consistently. So there doesn't need to be any pressure or chastising to make yourself do it if it just doesn't feel natural to do it that often. And that's pretty much all I can say about the matter as far as how to do self-inquiry, how to keep up with it on a daily basis.